Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome once again to Time Warp, the show where we take a wrestler and see how they would do somewhere else along the wrestling timeline. My name is Paul Laporte, and joining me today are my two special guest hosts. One very special, the birthday boy, Daniel Peruzzi.
Oh, calm yourself.
And my usual co-host, Mike Miner.
You condescending son of a bitch.
Wow.
How dare
The
you?
wrestler we are going to be taking a look at today is going to be by fan request CM Punk.
Again, I didn't request this one either.
No, this was requested. We actually got this request on Twitter. And the difference between this one and other past shows we've done is normally we take a wrestler and see wrestler from WWE and so see how they would do in a different era of WWE's history. This is going to be a little bit different. We are going to take CM Punk. We are going to put him into the Attitude Era. But it isn't going to be necessarily how he does in the WWF. It is going to be, where does CM Punk end up? That's going to be the question that we're going to be looking at. So we're taking CM Punk, we're putting him in. Any organization is fair game. Where does CM Punk, with all we know about him, what wrestler is he known as? What company wrestler does he make his name as?
No, man. No doubt ECW. Mainly because that's where he was headed before the company went defunct.
It is true. He was starting to do house shows and dark matches for ECW prior to them folding in 2001. What do you think, Dan?
I agree initially. Paul Heyman was the guy who championed CM Punk, so of course the original ECW, Paul Heyman's going to see him at some point and say, this guy is an amazing talent, I've got to have him, and I'll do whatever I can to get him there. Mm-hmm. And so I think, at first anyways, ECW is where he begins.
Okay, so I think
in terms of bigger.
Yeah, we're all in agreement that Punk starts there, I think. That seems like the most logical choice. ECW was kind of the premier independent promotion back in its heyday, obviously. My issue is this. CM Punk does not become known as an ECW guy primarily because CM Punk is in ECW. The first bounced paycheck he gets, he is out of there. He is gone. He is not going to stick around. He is not going to put up a good showing, put on a good face for the company. He is going to bitch out Paul Heyman, and he's going to walk right out that door.
Hey, Mike Awesome, what are you doing? Can I follow you?
Exactly. And the first place he's going to go to, the place he would end up, in my opinion, once he walked out that door, he would walk right into the door at WCW.
Wow, I don't know about that. Just because I don't think they'd want somebody of his profile. I just don't see it.
Well, they signed the Sandman. They signed Public Enemy.
Damn it! You are right, but you know what? They proceeded to do nothing with them. They held on to them like they were toys and just kind of threw them into a box.
It isn't about are they going to utilize them properly.
Well, look at Mikey Whipwreck. He was another one. They just kind of held on to those guys, and they weren't satisfied.
Right. He wasn't doing anything with it, but they were getting paid a lot of money, and that's where they ended up. That's where they were contracted to.
There was a time where he actually, he was passionate about pro wrestling, and I don't think he would have stayed. Even in WCW, if he went there, it would have been another case of, okay, this guy goes to ECW, just like Raven. Then he jumps to WCW, stays a while, gets dissatisfied, possibly jumps back to ECW if they're financially stable enough.
But they weren't. They never were.
Not,
ECW was never ever financially stable.
There were guys that jumped or that stayed there that were paid, but you know what? Toward the end is when they really started having the problems. But as far as jumping back to ECW or jumping to the WWF, it's a toss-up. I think he probably would have just jumped to the WWF without that second stay in ECW.
I don't know if WWF takes CM Punk at that point. Like, do they need another person that they would no doubt view as a mid-carder at that time? Like, there's no way they think he's going to be main event talent. They didn't think he was going to be when he was around. So there's no reason to think that they would have that high of a ceiling for him. So who in the company is going to want CM Punk? WCW will take whoever they would take at the time. WWF was a lot more selective. So
that's definitely true.
Well, that's the thing about WCW having a lot of money.
There was also closer connections in WCW to ECW than there was to WWF in terms of talent being fed to WCW through ECW through Nancy Benoit, woman.
It's true.
So that they had kind of more of a clear outlet, and like Dan said, WCW seemed to want to bloat their roster up more. CM Punk, again, at that time, at his age, probably fits into the cruiserweight division quite well.
Yeah.
So I think he has a better niche for himself there, and they can at least be like, no, he's not going to be in the main event, but he is going to be a part of the show probably every week through some sort of match.
I just don't see him settling for less than what he wants. Even just like he did a couple of years ago, he wasn't going to get that main event spot at WrestleMania. He wasn't going to settle. He wasn't going to stay around. Just like WCW, I don't see him staying around because he's a cruiserweight and he's just, here's the cruiserweight belt, and he knows he's as good as he is.
I don't see him staying around, but if assuming that he's into ECW, he leaves because he isn't getting paid. What are his other options at that time? WCW is the next level up, and he'll go there to try to grind it out, to try to do what he can.
Isn't that so goddamn sad to say? It's WCW was the next level up from ECW.
They were more popular. It is what it is. It's not like it isn't. It's not a matter of quality of the show.
I don't think WCW was more popular at the. It was
It was.
It was at a certain point. It was more popular, but then as ECW picked up steam and people were getting word of it, ECW was
the cool thing with WCW was still pop music.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
WCW was on its way out.
Random guy on the
ECW
street
was
what
on
the
its way out.
NWO is. He'll tell you. You ask random guy on the street what the triple threat is.
Yeah.
Yeah, ECW was still the counterculture. It wasn't the thing. WCW was the thing.
I don't know. It just got to a point where WCW wasn't the thing. The thing about WCW, though, was, they started doing stuff that ECW was doing. They were trying to replicate it, and that's where they failed miserably. They tried their own hardcore division in an attempt to make cash off of ECW's back.
WWF did that too, though.
To be fair, they did, but they didn't constantly mention Barbed Wire City, and they didn't constantly mention these guys came from there. They didn't constantly try to ride the coattails of a small indie organization by making references to them every week and then taking the wrestlers and placing them into the matches that were, half as good as they were just a year or 2 years before.
No, they were just kind of aping the things that ECW was doing.
And doing it miserably.
No, I'm saying WWF. I mean
WWF
everybody
did it as well.
still to this day believes that at least there is some of the Sandman that lives in Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like, that there are certain things, and they did take that hardcore wrestling and that hardcore style. And I will agree they did it better than WCW. But the thing is that, okay, so you don't think that...
There were some lines they weren't willing to cross, though. But...
All right, so you don't think that CM Punk is going to be artistically satisfied in WCW, but do you think that WWF is going to offer him a better spot?
No, I just think he would have left the business altogether. I think he would have left a lot sooner than he did a couple of years ago. I think he wouldn't have had, as lengthy a stay. I mean, if he knew how talented he was and he was able to display it, but they didn't give him a shot, I don't think he would have been around. And that's happened to a lot of guys. But, I think it would have happened to CM Punk years ago, if it was around that time.
Plus, I don't think he has the outlet as easily accessible in MMA as he does now. Like, he left because frustration and everything else, but there's had to be a part of him to some extent that knew he could go and do the MMA thing. Back
of course,
in
another outlet.
The Attitude Era time, that's not an option available to him, so he's going to have less options. WCW is going to be the company he's going to go to. He's going to go there for a while. He's going to not be happy with it, and after a couple of years, he's going to try to make the switch. I think it's all very dependent on the exact timing. Like, is he still a part of WCW when Vince buys them? Is he already gone and comes back on the invasion angle?
Also,
do they use him for that? Like, there's a lot of...
Also think of it this way, before you go too far, think of it this way. A guy that's a mid-carder in WCW, how far would he realistically get in the WWF? You have...
Chris Jericho.
Jericho was a mid-carder.
Well, God damn it, let me finish what I was trying to say. You got guys like Jericho. God damn it, let me finish what I'm saying. And then there's that one guy that I can't remember, but,
Something with a B.
What's that?
Something with a B.
Boogeyman?
Yeah, Bennett. Something, I don't know.
Shut
up!
Stu Bennett? Oh, Barrett.
Yeah.
You're thinking Wade Barrett.
That's right, I'm thinking Wade Barrett.
Oh, that's the guy that came in.
Yeah.
But, God, he was gone for a while. Anyway,
so
the
WCW mid-card guys would do...
So you just made a point and immediately harpooned your entire point.
God damn it. I'm not even going to get to my point because you're trying to harpoon it for me.
Continue.
But I'm just trying to say that, it wasn't often. I mean, there were guys that went from WCW to the WWF, and unless you were exceptionally talented and you had a certain look to you, you weren't going to get past a certain point.
And Punk is exceptionally talented and has a memorable look to him. I think Punk fits that bill 100%.
But, I don't see them pushing a guy like him at that point. Not during that time, especially when you got somebody like Stone Cold Steve Austin. You got it was filled. The place was filled with talent, and unless Punk didn't get frustrated, which I think he would have gotten frustrated floundering around, it took years before Jericho and the guy that I was talking about, the one I can't remember,
Benoit.
You're trying to harpoon my goddamn point. Stop that, you condescending son of a bitch.
It's his birthday. Stop yelling at him.
Dan, you make Doink the Clown look tan. Anyway,
where did that come from?
He's been wanting to say that all day. Let him say it. Let him get in his shit.
You make Mr. Potato Head look like he's African American.
All right, Paul, what do you think?
All right.
Anyway, I forgot where I was going with this. Just CM Punk, he would have floundered around. He wouldn't have gone as far as he would have at a later time. Just like Chris Jericho, he had to wait a while. Benoit, he had to wait a while. Who else? Eddie Guerrero, he waited
Punk
a while.
had to wait a while in WWE as it was. He didn't go straight to the top of the card.
He was in FCW for like 3 years.
Yeah, but you know what? He knew what to expect in FCW. He was in developmental.
And he would know what to
That's what
expect
he
in
went.
WCW and
And
WWF
on top
at
of
the
that,
time.
CM Punk was writing for TV. He was collaborating with Paul Heyman. He was still hungry at that point. That's something he wouldn't have been able to do in the WWF. I mean, the most he would have gotten is a chance to go out and try to say something, and if they didn't like it, they would have said, well, whatever.
The thing is, though, is that the Attitude Era was a much more freewheeling time
And
where they were
that's what I
allowing
was
people
saying.
to fire off the cuff and say what they wanted to say.
Yeah, and that's all fine and good, but if it
Okay,
didn't work...
So here's what happens. Here's how I think this goes. CM Punk starts in ECW, bounces his first paycheck, or bounces the first paycheck he bounces, he's gone.
Mike Awesome!
He doesn't.
Hey!
Yeah, he doesn't stick around. He doesn't remain loyal. He gets pissed off because he has a really good relationship with Paul Heyman right now, but Paul Heyman never signed his paychecks. So
That's why he has a good
Side
relationship.
note.
exactly.
Side note, remember Stevie Richards in WCW?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay. So he goes to WCW because there's an outlet there. Makes a decent name for himself in the Cruiserweight division, probably U.S. title division. Gets frustrated with the NWO. Leaves.
Oh, I wanted to see CM Punk versus David Arquette.
Goes to WWF at that point. Gets his outlet to... He'll get to drop his pipe bomb on WCW on WWF television because they'll be more than happy to let him say whatever he wants about WCW at that
But
point.
this was also a time where it was rarely mentioned that WCW even existed.
DX rode
yeah, I
up
was
to
gonna say,
WCW with a tank.
I was going to say, DX drove a tank up to Monday Night Raw.
Rarely mentioned.
But this
that was
would be
one of the
one
rare
of the- that
times,
would
but
be-
it made an impact.
This would be
so
one
to
of
speak.
that would be one of those cases. They
Okay,
didn't really
all right,
have
there
the
you go.
opportunity to have somebody come in and trash, or people who just wouldn't want to. Like when the Radicals came over, those guys,
Well-
even though they weren't happy, they're not going to burn a bridge. CM Punk has
That's-
no problem burning bridges.
That's what I was going to say.
He is a high-level bridge burner.
I'll give you that. I will give you that. You're right. I
So
concede
he
on
would
that
show
point.
up, he would drop his pipe bomb on WC. It'd basically be the Medusa thing with him. Even
CM Punk
even
for 2017 Hall of Fame.
even as far as probably showing up with the cruiserweight or the U.S. title and throwing it in a garbage can or something like that. Like I could definitely see CM Punk doing something like that.
Can you see CM Punk at the 2017 Hall of Fame pulling out a microphone from the trash can?
Yeah, I don't know.
You sounded very nervous there. Anyway.
But I don't know how far he gets in the WWF, and to your credit, he probably leaves there to go to Japan, I guess, because that's the only other place he can go.
So he would do a Brock Lesnar 2004, essentially, is what you're saying.
I think so.
Well, I mean, not quite the
Or
same,
maybe at
not
that
quite
point when the
same
UFC
path,
is
but-
starting to explode right in the early 2000s there, then that's when he decides to make the switch to MMA or whatever.
Where did Heyman go immediately after ECW folded?
He went immediately to the
WWF.
WWF.
Did
He was.
I mean,
he was.
ECW
He
was
was
still
Yeah,
operating.
he showed up on WWF television before the books on ECW had officially closed. Like people did not even realize ECW had been closed until they saw Paul Heyman
Gotcha.
show up on Monday Night Raw. I think Taz was one of the people.
So
it
does
was,
he-
it was still operating for, like, what, another week or two? Maybe even up to a month?
Yeah, I think they had one more show after that.
So at that
Yeah.
point, is Heyman just an on-screen figure, or is he doing stuff behind the scenes
He was
too?
doing commentary.
He was just doing commentary.
All right, because if ECW folds, Heyman gets there, Heyman has anything to do with the company in any financial or booking aspect, and thinks Punk can make them money, Heyman will advocate for Punk again. You know,
fair point. That is a good point.
How much WWF listens to him at the time, or how much they actually do it. I agree with your point that I don't think that he reaches anywhere near the heights he reached, as his current career path was. I don't think that he's able to get there. Maybe late in his career, he gets near the top. Once, like, Rock and Stone Cold, and assuming he's still at WWE at that point, and Rock and Stone Cold are kind of, that's finally faded out, then maybe he kind of is able to step up and fill that vacuum. But he definitely nowhere near the success he has currently.
Ooh, I think I've got a new Time Warp episode for the future. What if The Rock stayed? Did we do that?
No, we haven't done that. Although that might be more of a change
More
of
of
the
a CTQ,
questions.
Okay.
More of a CTQ episode, but we'll definitely consider that.
Thinking of ideas on the spot, ladies and gentlemen. Present your ideas to us in the future as well.
He just changed the question.
Change the show.
Yeah,
change the whole goddamn
Look at
show.
that.
Roll credits.
We just made a sweet segue, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot depends on when and where when he ends up where.
Yeah.
If he doesn't show up in WWF until, like, if he rides it out in WCW until they close and doesn't show up in WWF until Heyman is there, until Heyman can, push for him, then yeah, you might be right. If he shows up in, like, if he has a year in ECW, a year in WCW, and then heads to WWF in 98, 99, where he's going to be a small fish in the biggest pond at this point, then maybe he gets disillusioned before Heyman ever gets there and he leaves. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's not even a thing of Punk. I think maybe we're not giving Punk enough credit here. We just assume that if Punk isn't holding the World Championship and main eventing WrestleMania, he's not going to be happy. And I don't necessarily think that that's the case.
It is a different time.
I think he's in WCW longer than what we think for that reason. I think he's okay. He'll understand that it's going to be a grind. It's going to take a while to get to wherever he wants to get to.
If I could push it back a little bit further, maybe even to the mid-90s, CM Punk shows up, I think he would show up in the WWF. I think he would be in the same position as a guy like Glenn Ruth, Matt Hardy, Jeff Hardy, enhancement talent. He'd be Phillip Brooks. And then eventually maybe he would become CM Punk, just like Glenn Ruth became Headbanger Thrasher.
Oh boy, that's a big comparison. You want to be compared to Headbanger Thrasher.
Oh man, yeah. But you know what? That's what I'm talking about. It's quite the personality change, and that's what it would be. Phil Brooks to CM Punk. You would have Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy to, Matt Hardy and Jeff Hardy.
Yes.
But stylistically, they were much different than they were in the
flower
beginning.
print as opposed to,
And that's what I'll never forget about them is when I first saw them on television, they were wearing flower print.
Yeah.
Even Matt Hardy facing, I think, maybe Isaac Yankem. He was in blue trunks, and it was just ridiculous looking. But, they wore the flower print, and then maybe within a year, after getting demolished by Kane, by having one thrown on the other, they were doing the Brood thing. They were doing the thing with Michael Hayes. So they were changed dramatically. I think something like that would have happened with CM Punk if it was a few years earlier. But since ECW was really emerging their own, they were really kind of coming out of the shadows, so to speak, with pay-per-view and even late into the run, a Friday night time slot. I think CM Punk would have been around 98, 99 in ECW if that was... if he was around that time, near, the first couple of years of his career. I think he would have went that route. But...
Okay, so let's kind of wrap everything up. We've kind of danced around it a little bit, but let's kind of nail down our concrete decisions of, regardless of... We all agree that Punk's going to kind of be a journeyman where he's going to bounce from place to place. He's not going to end up and stick. He's not going to be a lifer in any one spot. Until, like, the end game of WWF, which is the only place left. And even then, maybe not so. Do we think he does as well in the Attitude Era, wherever he ends up, as he did in his actual era?
Not even close.
Not even close.
Not even close.
You don't think he even gets
maybe a championship. Maybe.
Like a secondary title or one world? Like, you mean, like, does he hold the world title?
Maybe a world title, but I just don't see that happening. I don't think WWF is willing to push him without Paul Heyman being in a position of power in WWF, which he just wasn't at the right time. I just don't think it works out well enough. And, that's even assuming he gets to WWF. I think he does, but that's making that assumption as it is. So there's just too many steps along the way that he has to get past to get to that point.
Minor.
God, it's back and forth with me. I'm going to harken back to an old WWE 2K13 video game commercial. They were promoting the Attitude Era stuff on that game, and CM Punk was promoting himself as the guy that's going to bring Attitude back to the WWE. He was kind of the last vestige, I want to say, of the Attitude Era just a couple of years ago. He was kind of a holdover from that, as far as personality goes. I think it worked splendidly for him a couple of years ago, but he may have gotten mixed up in the crowd in the Attitude Era. But then again, like Dan said, I'm so back and forth on this, it's absurd. But, he did have a unique look. With the tattoos at least, but before he got all the tattoos, he was just kind of there. The shorts, the tattoos, the few tattoos, and the blonde hair. But would he have stood out? Perhaps a later version of him, yes. Earlier version, the young version, no. He would have been looked at like, a punk kid, so to speak. But I guess that's what he was going for. So would he stand out? Only if he was able to give the attitude that he was displaying in his mid to late WWE run. But even then, it's extremely hard to say. So I think I'm going to stick with he just kind of gets swallowed up in the scene, and then he'd probably wind up bailing out of the business altogether because he knows he's more, much more talented than people give him credit for.
All right. Both of those are good points, and I can agree with them. But again, I think so much of this rides on where he transitions to and when. So you guys have already kind of covered the two of the scenarios. I'm going to cover a third in that does he get the success he does in WWE? I don't know, but I think he gets close, and here's why. Because if he is somebody who is willing to jump ship from WCW to the WWF at a time where the feelings between the two were at their worst, and he is willing to verbally run them into the ground, he will be somebody that he can leverage that competition between those two in his favor and use that as a way to kind of get himself shot to the top of the card from WWE. If he can stay in WCW long enough to get himself established as a WCW guy, so then WWF can say, oh, look, now we have this guy and he's doing better here. Look at all we can do with him and you squandered him, ha ha. Then I think he is somebody who can be a multiple-time champion and then rides that momentum because kind of, there are obviously certain exceptions, but once you get to that spot, you have generally a long career and you have multiple reigns with the title like that, like a Jericho, somebody like that, where you may not be at the top of the card all the time and you may never be the most important guy on the show at any given moment, but you will be important and you'll be important enough to hold that belt at certain times. So I think if he stays in WCW long enough, or even ECW, if I'm wrong about him bouncing when he when he gets a bad check, if he sticks around with ECW to get known as an ECW guy, once they fold, he can get into kind of a similar route. Like I think the closest comparisons we can use for CM Punk as to how his career could end up are Chris Jericho for WCW and Rob Van Dam for ECW. Yeah. I think either of those guys are a good example. He could be either of those guys.
RVD is what I was thinking of because, ECW closed and then RVD made the jump.
He could be either of those guys, hold the world belt a couple times. Like I said, will he ever be the level of Steve Austin and The Rock and The Undertaker? No, but I think he still does well for himself and has a long career.
The last thing I was going to mention was CM Punk. I mentioned that he could drop out of the business altogether, but that leaves him nowhere because UFC at that point really wasn't that strong. They were kind of going under, and he might have just had to ride it out. Especially if he was making a decent paycheck, he would have just had to ride it out and stick around. But
It's always Japan.
I think,
Exactly.
I think
Who
it was
knows?
Japan before anything else there. Yeah.
Who knows? You know, you never really know. Brock Lesnar went to Japan. He went there for a little while after he bailed. So, you know, there's always an option, but it may not be the option that you want to take.
Russell
so,
Nakamura.
Oh,
Brock Lesnar did. We could see CM
I
Punk
know
versus Shinsuke Nakamura. That would have been fun.
battle the knees.
That would be fun.
Yeah. Or CM Punk versus Kenta, and if he ends up in Noah. That's a possibility
Who's
too.
gonna hit
Of course,
the-
that's happened already. We've already seen that.
Who's
but-
going to hit the backwards, go to sleep?
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Time Warp. We want to know what you guys think. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to check out all of our other programming. On Mondays, we have this show, Time Warp. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have Booking About a Wrestler. We have Changing the Questions. On Wednesdays, we have Booking About a Wrestler. On Fridays, we have Let's Play TEW. Also, be sure to check out our website, Changing the Questions. No, Changing the Qs, changingtheqs.com. www.changingtheqs.com. If you want to check us out on Twitter, you can check us out at the same handle, at Changing the Qs. It's just at Changing the QS. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook. Just search for Changing the Questions there. If you want to send us a good old-fashioned email, do so. changingthequestions@gmail.com. For my co-host, birthday boy Dan Peruzzi,
You still got it.
and Mike Miner.
He stole my shtick. I was going to use that.
Goodbye.
Condescending son of a bitch.